T, Tass, and particular segments. And next week we'll be live at the Mall of America and shuttling and funneling through people. I thought this guy might be a part of such a story because he is a relatively famous Minnesotan, at least for those of us who aspired to be sports writers at some point in our lives. But alas, I am now just asking him from his palatial home in Connecticut that he shares with his Hall of Fame wife. I know he loves it when I rub that in. I don't like most Russians, and Russians have been given a bad name lately, but ever since maybe like the cosmonauts in Gilligan's Island, this guy's my favorite Russian, my favorite sports writer. We welcome back Steve Rushin. You can follow him out on Twitter at Steve Rushin, of course, at Sports Illustrated, never a bot, and the book is really, your book, Steve's kind of all about Minnesota, right, or like life and growing up in Minnesota, and I'm kind of shocked that you're not doing the whole Radio Row thing next week, but it is quite cold there, right?
It's quite cold here in Connecticut. It's quite cold in Minnesota. I'm actually going to Minnesota in the week leading up to the Super Bowl. I just won't be there for the game. If the Vikings had been in, I'd be there for the game. Every one of my friends told me, my relatives, seriously, the Vikings are going to be in the Super Bowl and you're not going to come? You would regret this for the next 25 years, presumably those 25 years in which the Vikings would, again, not go to the Super Bowl. But so if the Vikings had been in, I'd be there.
You know, I have a strange history with the Vikings, right? Because Brian Billick's my partner here. I was in the Metrodome. I was literally sitting in the stands in the upper deck during the Dirty Bird game. I left my seat believing the Falcons were extinguished. You know, I mean, they were done, right? And I got down to the press box. Vikings had the lead. Everything's cool. You know, place is a little geared. What transpired that day then, and then sort of this beatdown this past weekend, I really wanted you to win, and I have lots of friends with the Eagles. I mean, Jim Schwartz, Joe Douglas, Corey Graham, Torrey Smith, all Baltimore guys. I'm currently, Steve, wearing my green Ravens hat, so I blend in a little bit with the Eagles because I know how friendly those folks are. But the whole notion that it would have been a home Super Bowl for a guy like you, right, and for someone from there that it means so much to, I didn't even go, I gave everybody like sort of 72 hours. I didn't even call anybody I knew from Minnesota because I really feel like I'm flying into a little bit of a funereal feel for a Super Bowl this week, and that's kind of a shame because it's going to be cold on top of it. But it is a bummer, I think, for all of us that are going out to cover the game.
Listen, everyone that I know thought that the Minneapolis Miracle was so unlikely. So many crazy things had to happen for that play to happen that 50 years of bad mojo had been expunged in that one play, and now the Vikings are going to beat the Eagles. They're going to go to the Super Bowl. They're going to beat the Patriots, presumably, we thought at the time, and it's going to be in Minnesota. Every one of those demons will be exercised in that one play, and the only two possibilities, I thought, when the Vikings went in to face the Eagles were that they would somehow revert to form and lose on some heartbreaking last-second missed chip shot, or that they would continue their march to win the Super Bowl. What I didn't anticipate was, because I'd forgotten, their 41-0, the famous 41 donut loss to the Giants in the NFC Championship of 2001 or whenever it was. I'd forgotten they were capable of that also. So that 38-7 just kind of was a 2x4 that reminded Vikings fans that this is how it goes. And we've never in Minnesota have had kind of reveled in our cursed status. There's never been a curse of the Bambino. There's never been a curse of the Billy Goat. It's just Minnesotans, they don't say much. They just sort of take it and move on. Having said that, it's not going to be funereal at the Super Bowl. Minnesota, they have this famous phrase, Minnesota nice. People are eager to show the best face of Minnesota to the world. Some people aren't. Some people are hoping it's 25 below and that people don't want to come to Minnesota in the summertime. They'll think it's like this year-round. Prince famously said, I like the cold. It keeps the bad people out. But more than that, Minnesotans are eager to show off the city, and it will be fun. I covered the Super Bowl the first time it was there in 1992. People forget that's when Thurman Thomas left his helmet on the sidelines for the first series. Mark Rippon was the Super Bowl MVP for the Redskins, and that was great. And that was in the dump that is the Metrodome. Now it's going to be in this beautiful stadium, Minneapolis has skyways. You don't have to walk outside in the wintertime, but a lot of people will want to because there'll be other cool stuff going on. But if the Vikings had been there, yeah, it would have been an insane party.
Steve, I wished romantic and all that stuff about 1992. That was my first Super Bowl, and I drove in a 1991 Jeep Wrangler with a rag top from Baltimore to Minneapolis with my CD collection and my pal. We stopped and saw Michael Jordan play at the stadium on the way out. Gretzky played that week at the Met Center against the North Stars. Guns N' Roses played the Target Center, and it snowed about 1.5 feet on Friday night, as I remember it, and actually, Donald Trump sat in my section at the Super Bowl that year. So, and I guess the part of the Metrodome and now showing off sort of the new Viking ship, and we did see it out there in October, as well as the backside of Case Keenum as a Ravens fan when we went out there. And my wife was so taken by it that she actually signed up for this. She wants to go out there next week. I figure there's no better person to give sort of a travelogue for Minnesota than you. Give me some stuff we should know about Minnesota or do when we get out there that should not make it such a bad time to be amongst Eagles fans, and there'll be plenty of those out there.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a condensed version of Minnesota. There are going to be the ice castles in St. Paul and Prince tributes and all kinds of stuff going on for Super Bowl week. Tom Brady claims that he's part Minnesotan and that he's gone ice fishing in his mother's hometown and all this. I don't know how many Super Bowl visitors are going to do that authentic Minnesota experience of going out ice fishing, snowmobiling, going to the cabin up north, as they say in Minnesota. But there's so much stuff to do. I grew up in Bloomington. You mentioned the Mall of America. That's used to be where the Twins and the Vikings and the North Stars played. I had forgotten that Gretzky had played there that week. Guns N' Roses had played there that week. But
think about it. Radio Row's going to be probably somewhere like where Killebrew hit one, right? I mean, Radio Row's right there on the Mall of America. So we could almost say we're broadcasting from the old Met, right?
Absolutely. When the Mall of America opened, the seat where Killebrew hit the longest home run in the history of Met Stadium was bolted to the exterior of a Hooters. And now the home plate is still embedded in the concourse where there's an amusement park inside the mall. I've always told visitors, don't go to the Mall of America to buy a pair of shoes or easier places to go. It's like you're parking at Disney World or something. But it is something that, people want to see. People fly in from the UK at the holidays, go next door from the airport to the Mall of America, then go back to the airport and fly back without having seen anything else in the Twin Cities. My favorite part of the Twin Cities, summer or winter, are the lakes in Minneapolis. The chain of lakes you can jog around, walk around. When you described driving your rag top to Minneapolis for the first Super Bowl there, it reminded me of the opening credits of Mary Tyler Moore. I could just see you gazing out the windshield.
Yeah, you're going to make it after all.
You're going to make it after all. I assume you threw your hat in the air in front of the IDS Tower downtown. There's a statue of Mary Tyler Moore down there. First Avenue, where Purple Rain was shot. It's a club right across from Target Center where the Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx play. The Wild are in St. Paul. St. Paul has this T-shirt, "Keep St. Paul Boring." They like to keep themselves, a well-kept secret. But I think that cat will be out of the bag. It's a great place. And if they don't have to Crisco the street poles for Eagles fans, that'll even be better. But I think Minnesotans feel like it's a partial victory hosting the Super Bowl there just because the Packers aren't in it. It's one thing that it would be nice if the Vikings got in, but the fact that the Packers aren't in has made many Minnesotans happy.
My favorite American sports journalist and writer is Steve Rushin. He is our guest. The book is Stingray Afternoons, a memoir about all things, really, Minnesota and youth and life. And Steve is a famous Minnesotan who will be in and out of Minnesota, as most Vikings fans will probably want to hide during the game as well. Dude, I'm a Ravens fan. I want to hide as well. I'm sure the Steelers fans feel the same way, and the Jaguars fans and all that stuff, which is why, I don't really even want to talk about Tom Brady winning or greasing down polls for Philadelphia sports fans who I have to endure because I live 80 miles away and sort of share the Ocean City with and the whole Eastern Shore with. But Minnesota, when I think of it, I think of like Prince, right? And I think of the Metrodome and the Homer Hanky and, a lake for every person in the state and that sort of thing. thing. You got to have a Prince story, dude. Like, you're a basketball guy. You marry a basketball legend. You're from the home team. Did you ever, like, shoot hoops with Prince? Or, I mean, any near-life, out-of-body experience with him or at all?
I never shot hoops with him. Everybody in Minnesota has a Prince story. You know, when the Minnesota Lynx won their third WNBA championship, he invited the whole team out to Paisley Park for a concert. Went to games there. He wrote a song about the Vikings. He was a big Minnesota sports fan. I'm not sure. You know, he took the phrase "Purple Rain" from the song "Ventura Highway" by America, but I always felt like he took the color purple from the Vikings. He was a huge sports fan, played went to Minneapolis Central, and my Prince story really is my dad's Prince story. In the mid-'80s, at the height of Prince's fame, my dad was flying to Los Angeles for business, and he had gotten upgraded to first class, and just before the cabin doors closed, two guys, really well-dressed guys in suits, identical shoes, got on, flanking Prince. Prince sat in the first row of first class on the window. Another bodyguard sat on the aisle. The second bodyguard sat in the back of the first class cabin. And whenever Prince had to get up to go to the bathroom, one bodyguard would get up, secure the bathroom door. Prince would go in. This guy would stand outside the bathroom. When Prince wanted to order a drink, he would whisper loudly to the bodyguard, who would then stand up and whisper to the flight attendant. And my dad, sitting directly behind Prince, heard him say each time, "Mineral water." So after, when the flight landed, he was in a jumpsuit, exactly as you would picture. He was going out to the Grammys, the American Music Awards, I can't remember which. When they landed, a golf cart met Prince at the gate. Two bodyguards got on with Prince. And then a red siren went on, and they drove off in one of those airport golf carts at about 3 miles an hour. He said it was the most conspicuous effort to look inconspicuous he ever seen, but it was probably the last time Prince flew commercial, and God knows why he even flew commercial that time. My dad had no idea who Prince was musically, but he thought that whole spectacle was hilarious. And you know,
what was he wearing? Was he wearing like purple velvet, like, you know, crushed? I mean, that sort of thing on the plane.
I think he was wearing like a cream jumpsuit, you know. And my dad just describes his bodyguards as, you know, he's immaculate suits and not a millimeter of wear on the heels of their shoes, and they made sure to stand in the aisle so that Prince could get off, and then they could get off before anybody else got off. And my dad just sort of thought it was hilarious. But of course, as kids in 1984, when 1999 had come out and Purple Rain was coming out that summer, you know, it's like, Dad, you were sat behind Prince. That's unbelievable. And of course, Prince was about 5 feet tall, and I'm sure he fully reclined into my dad's lap. But we would have killed for that experience.
You know, it's kind of cool being a writer and having access and stuff, but I've got a crazy Prince story because he played that press conference in Miami before the Super Bowl, and my wife was there working Radio Row, and we went into the press conference and grabbed seats in the front row. My wife caught his pick, but the strangest thing is it all ended in about 8 minutes because he was about to do a fake press conference and then play Johnny B. Good and a couple of songs, and he was in an orange jumpsuit. And we all left the press conference. It broke up, and I went to go to the bathroom. And we're in this dank, convention hall in Miami Beach, and there are bodyguards in front of the bathroom. And sure enough, I can't go to the bathroom, and sort of had to wait for the bathroom. And out comes all 4'11.5" of Prince with a nod to the bodyguards, and off goes Prince. So I did get to use the facility after Prince. I hope your dad didn't have to hold it. You know, once Prince comes out of the bathroom, maybe Dad can go in somewhere over Idaho or something, right?
I just like to picture the Prince glyph symbol on a restroom. You know how you have the male and female symbol. But I'll say this for Prince. You know, he in addition to being a brilliant artist, he stayed in the Twin Cities. He stayed in Minnesota. He rented a house in Beverly Hills. He had a place in France or Spain or whatever. But he lived in Minnesota. You saw him around, and Bob Dylan, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature a couple of years ago, I don't know that he's ever been back, and that's not a no diss to Bob Dylan, but we have these two giant musical icons, and when Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, the marquee outside the high school at Hibbing High School said, "Congrats, not congratulations, though they had room for that. Congrats to Robert Zimmerman, class of 1957, for winning the Nobel a prize in literature, and I have no doubt that the other side of that marquee had like that week's hot lunch menu. But that's Minnesota, you know. It's hard to become too big or too famous or too put on too much of a pretense in that state, and I love that about Minnesota. My sister has a cabin in a town called Nisswa, and as you pull into the quaint little downtown there, there's a huge sign that towers over the main drag, and it says Nisswa Square, pretty good shopping. And that's about as boastful as Minnesota gets. There's that kind of Scandinavian influence. You remember the Danish beer slogan for Carlsberg? Carlsberg, probably the best beer in the world. That's not a very good, boast, probably. And that's kind of the way Minnesota is. And so part of me feels like, and I hate to say this to Minnesotans, but if the Vikings did win the Super Bowl, would some small thing be lost? You know, the Cubs won the World Series, the Red Sox won 3 of them since their 86-year drought, and is it kind of the one thing that we still have to cling to is the hard luck Vikings and not winning the Super Bowl?
2 guys with wives more famous than us. Steve Rushin joining us here from Sports Illustrated. You can follow him at Steve Rushin out on Twitter. And, of course, I was hoping to grab him in Minnesota because he is a famous Minnesotan and my favorite sports writer. The book is Stingray Afternoons. So let's pretend we're on Radio Row now where you just sit down and we got to talk about the game and promote the book real quick. First on the book, and obviously you've written a lot of books. This one very near and dear and certainly from all reviews. Very, very personal to you, right?
Yeah, part of it was just a selfish effort to try to relive my childhood. So the book is about those kind of innocent years of childhood from age 3 to age 13. And for me, those years coincided with the 1970s. So it's about growing up in the 70s, growing up in a specific place, Bloomington, Minnesota. But I think, if you ever were a child, you'd identify with a lot of it. I've got 4 kids of my own. I see, life is great as a kid often, but oftentimes it's scary. Oftentimes there's anxieties. There's, long periods of boredom. And I wanted to kind of relive all that, describe it. Summer was great and never ending, but there were a lot of days where mom just kicked you out of the house and said, find something to do. And so you'd have to, try to head a soccer ball 100 times, 200 times, set a record of bashing a tennis ball against a brick wall.
And then winter sets in. My parents did that to me here, and it was 30 degrees there. It's like, I just think of you people freezing to death there. All of you, literally.
It was so great because you would huddle around the radio on the coldest, snowiest days and wait for the alphabetical school closings to find, you'd probably, in our case, we'd tune into WCCO radio when it was getting to the letter C, and then we'd have to wait for it to go all around the alphabet to get back to Bloomington when they would announce Bloomington, public and parochial. No school. It'd be like a VE Day celebration, and you have a snow day, you'd be kicked out of the house, but you'd be out there in your snowmobile boots with the Wonder Bread bags on your feet, and, you'd come in occasionally to have chocolate, you get kicked back out. And I was a family of indoorsmen. We were the one family in Minnesota that didn't hunt, fish, snowmobile, have a cabin, do any of that stuff outdoors. But build a fort, have a snowball fight, play street hockey. That's the kind of stuff you did in the winter, and winter was much of the year, as you know, and still is. So I've lived my whole life, 51 years now, in Minnesota, New York, Connecticut, Chicago. I've never lived in a warm place, and I like to go to warm places in the winter. I'd like to retire to a warm place, but 51 years in now, it's just kind of the way life is. I feel like, how do people in a warm climate, year-round warm climate, get anything done? I wouldn't want to be indoors writing a book alone in a room if it weren't so cold outside that I didn't want to be outside.
Stingray Afternoons, a memoir. Steve Rushin, our guest. You can follow him on Twitter at Steve Rushin as well as at Sports Illustrated as I make my way out to Minnesota. They're playing a football game out there, and, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. As I said to my wife, the reason I didn't drive to Philadelphia last week to see my dear friend Jim Schwartz was if they won, I thought they would burn the city down, and if they lose, I thought they would burn the city down. So I didn't really want to be in the city when that happened, but I will be in Minnesota one way or another. I'm a little worried about the league, And when I bring a guy like you on, and I only talk to you once or twice a year, certainly where the league is. I'm in Baltimore. The ghost of Baltimore football passed as we lost the football team here by not supporting it. I know you know that famously because we're the same age. We had to fight to get a team back here. You guys almost had your baseball team contracted by Bud Selig 2 decades ago, as I remember it. So you're familiar with some feelings of angst in stadia and stadiums and civic duty and all of that stuff. You lost the North Stars as well. So I mean, and the Wild or the Rage out there. I would say for us, where we are right now, here in the middle of all of this, I'm worried about all aspects of the league, from CTE and all of that. But I think that at some point it only can get so big, and then it starts to shrink. And it's about to do that in my market, but I feel like it's doing that in a lot of places.
It absolutely is. Hello?
Yeah. Go. I'm sorry.
It absolutely is, and I think you've got it exactly right, because CTE and head trauma, no question, that's a huge existential problem for the league, as it should be for anybody who watches football and struggles with that conflict of, am I party to, brain damage? But also, there's that aspect of the NFL got so big, so bloated, so popular, so it just became so all dominating. And I don't mean to say this in the past tense. I mean, the television ratings are still huge. It's still, the Super Bowl will still be the most watched thing every year. It's a national holiday. People want the following day off. All of that remains true. But has it peaked in popularity? Does it have only one way to go, down? And people have been, there were Sports Illustrated covers from 25 years ago about the NFL is on its decline and all that. So I'm hesitant to predict any kind of short-term decline, but I agree with you that things can only get so big without then having to get a little smaller. And I think that's what's happening at the NFL, and I think or what will happen in the NFL, and I think it's probably appropriate. I think the fact that we've had this national reckoning about concussions and CTE and whether kids should play football before high school or play tackle football at all is important, and the NFL will have to reckon with that, or face some really dire consequences in the future, not just for its players, but for the overall health of the league.
What you working on that I'm going to be reading next, Steve?
Well, I've written a preview Super Bowl. Minneapolis hosting the Super Bowl story that I had to revise once we confirmed that the Vikings would not be in it. So, kind of a guide to the city and the psyche of Minnesotans. And, I'm working on a book now that I hope to have finished sometime in the summer, since that's my deadline. But I never like to talk about those specifically when I'm working on it, because I always say, well, what if I don't finish it? I shouldn't have told people to expect it, but hopefully I'll have a book out a year from this summer.
All right. Well, I will track you down and chase you down, as I try to do once or twice a year. But I feel bad for all the Minnesotans and all the Vikings fans. But, hey, the Twin Cities are around the corner. And, hey, I'll say this. For all things Minnesota, I went up to Target a couple years ago on my baseball tour, and I did throw my hat in the air in front of the Mary Tyler Moore statue, and I did search out all of the statues of Kirby Puckett and the like and all that. But Rod Carew was one of my favorite players as a kid. And the way this story has played out, I finally had a chance to really sit and talk to him after the Conrad Rulon, who played for the Ravens, heart. I mean, I'm in the bowels of the football stadium during a preseason game, and there's Rod Carew with the parents of the kid who died, who gave him his heart, and John Harbaugh is there, and we're having a conversation. And I mean, Rod Carew, his story and losing his daughter to leukemia, and my wife is a 2-time leukemia survivor, Steve. Rod Carew's story is incredible, right?
Yes, sir. I visited Rod Carew when he was, before he'd gotten his heart transplant, when he needed it. He was hooked up to something called an LVAD that was pumping his blood through his body, and out in Coronado, California. And I was the first guy that he revealed all of this to for a story. And I sat with him 10 minutes after arriving, and told him, I grew up in Bloomington. I was there in the day in 1977 when he went over 400 in late June against the White Sox, and was then on the cover of Time and Sports Illustrated. And we just sat there talking, and before very long, he and I both were in tears. And I told him that how my brother is alive today because he had bone marrow transplants with a blood cancer that he has called multiple myeloma, and how the work that he did when his own daughter passed away, before she passed away, advocating for people to be donors. For a guy who was reluctant to kind of be out there as the public face of anything, but for the only time I can think of in an interview, I found myself breaking down in tears and having to be comforted by the guy I'm interviewing. And he was such a sweet guy, such a beautiful ball player, so much a part of my childhood. We would stuff lunch meat into the right cheek of our to mimic the tobacco that he,
Well, at least you weren't stuffing tobacco in there, Steve.
Yeah.
Get some big league chew is what you needed, probably. I think
big league chew didn't come out till 1979 or 80. So when I was younger than that, when you're 8, instead of doing the red man, I did buttock pressed salami.
You were never Oliva or Killebrew, really? Never.
You know who I was?
Tolan. Everybody wanted to be Tolan, right?
I liked Dave Engel, a catcher. I liked Bombo Rivera, who everybody liked because
I love
of his
Bombo.
name.
I love Bombo. Played left field at Memorial Stadium in '79, and we went out. We talked. Well, the name's Bombo. I mean, if you're gonna, if you're ever gonna play Robin Ficker in left field you do it to Bombo Rivera, right?
Absolutely. So Bombo Rivera, I think, was the leading write-in candidate for a student body president at the University of Minnesota in 1979. I mean, he was hugely popular, kind of cult figure on some terrible Twins teams in the 1979.
How many dogs and cats named Bombo in the Twin Cities in the early 80s? Probably a lot.
Well, I mean, I had a lot of no longer, but I had a lot of passwords at one point that were Bombo Rivera related. But
I had a Sixto Lescano thing, so don't worry about it, man. We all had a player, I like Bobby Darwin too, another former Twinkie. But
I'm sure, like me as a kid, always thought Sixto Lescano, like Three Finger Brown, was six-toed, or he was either missing 4 or he had an additional 6th on 1 foot. And, but I worked at the stadium those 3 years, 79, 80, 81, the last 3 years of that stadium before the Twins moved into the Metrodome, and then started developing a good young team with Puckett and Herbeck and Gaetti and those guys. And those teams they would draw, you look at the attendance figures now, you can't believe it. They would draw 600,000, 700,000 to that stadium. There'd be 8,000 people there at a game, and then you had the strike-shortened 81 season. Nobody was going to those games. And then now we're 2 stadiums removed from that. Target Field, for my money, the most beautiful field in baseball. And the Wild have their own arena. The Vikings have their place. You've got the University of Minnesota has their own football stadium where the Vikings played while U.S. Bank was being built.
The barn, barn. Don't forget the barn. Come on.
I'm not going to forget the barn, but I'm just talking about the new stadiums. And Minnesota was always the place that was going to draw the line at taxpayer-financed stadiums. And no, we put this line in the sand. You billionaire owners, forget it. And now we end up with a stadium for every team, and so it just needs a little bit more success to pour into those stadiums, in addition to the billions that have been poured into them.
Well, didn't Hubert Humphrey once say it would have been Omaha, a colder Omaha, if you didn't have a team, right?
Cold Omaha, and that's the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. But I don't think it was Hubert Humphrey who said that. Who did say that? I think it was somebody leveraging their own stadium. But I mean, it's in no disrespect to Omaha.
Calvin Griffith,
lovely.
probably.
My sister went to med school at Creighton. But I mean, the Twin Cities, they don't. I don't think their civic self-esteem is dependent on. I mean, this week, dependent on the sports teams. It was people were not happy. Don't get me wrong, with the Vikings losing, but there's a lot going on there, and whether or not the Wild advance in the playoffs this year is not going to make or break the lives of Minnesotans.
Well, I was going to let you go 7 or 8 minutes ago, but I'm glad you told me the Rod Carew story. And I think the Lescano thing probably had to do with the baseball cards and anybody who had hair like Oscar Gamble or later on my brother John Lowenstein. Anybody that had the fro thing going off the hat was probably a guy I liked back in 1975, 76, 77. And then it just sort of caught on, But
Skip Jutsi, the Astros catcher with eye black and the hair sticking out of the helmet. I had about 9 of his cards in the 1974 Topps set, and the Astros won the World Series. I'm still thinking of Skip Jutsi, the Astros catcher, and 1974 Topps. Those images from those 1970s or whatever era you grew up in baseball cards are kind of where every team is frozen in my mind with that logo. A guy standing with a windbreaker under his jersey in some empty spring training field posing for a cops photographer while doing something ridiculous like catching a ball in foul territory in an empty stadium. That still remains to me the most vivid imagery in baseball 40 years later.
Oh, going back and making fun of Topps baseball cards in the early 70s, especially the airbrushing of certain hats and helmets and things written on the bottom of bats for Bill Ripken and all that sort of stuff. Steve, always a pleasure, man. I'm sorry I'm going to miss you in Minnesota. Sorry I held you lingered a little longer, but I learned a little bit about you and the bone marrow registry, and I've got I got a miracle in the other room here as well. So congrats to you, and I'll be reaching to you for some stuff on that moving forward. We'll save some lives together, man.
Hey, next time the Vikings are in the Super Bowl, we'll do this again.
Or 25 years from now, we'll come back again. Steve, a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nestor.
You got it. Steve Rushin, my favorite Russian. I don't get along with most Russians. Stingray Afternoons, a memoir is the name of the book. And you can find Steve out on Twitter, of course, at Steve Rushin as well. Every time I went to put his name into my Google Calendar, it spelled it Russin. I'm like, rush in, like Geddy Lee, rush in. No, Russian. And it just kept reverting it. But it's Rushin, like my favorite Canadian, Geddy Lee and Rush, even though they're now broken up on the internet. The book is Stingray Afternoons, a memoir. He's, of course, at Sports Illustrated and a famous Minnesotan that I will not have on Radio Row next week, which is why I got him this week. We'll be on Radio Row next week in the Mall of America, where Rod Carew and Harmon Killebrew and Fran Tarkington and the Purple People Eaters, everybody got it done back in the day, and Bud Grant and all that good stuff. We'll have all sorts of surprises, lots of Hall of Famers, lots of fun. We'll be on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And, of course, if there's any breaking news between now and then, and the Orioles deal Manny Machado off to the Diamondbacks, you'll get it all first on the WNST text service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis is here on Thursdays from 3 until 5. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.